Morning, Boker Tov. We're still in the sugi of Yayin, trying to figure out the requirements of volume of Yayin with regard to Kiddush, with regard to Nisuch HaYayin al Gabi Mizbeach, with regard to Dalit Kosos on Leil Pesach. So we're on Daf Ches Amud Beis, and we're up to Ma'u Lotzeis B'Yayin Mizugin. And you'll find this about 2/3 down the Amud on Ches Amud Beis here in Masechet Shekalim. But before we do that, I just want to point out that I had some confusion about the volume of Yayin in a Kos Shal Kiddush, and the truth be told, that I begin to appreciate why I was confused about it, because I basically use two different Gemaras. One is Masifta, the other is the Art Scroll, and I think they're on a head-on collision. I'll read to you both relevant lines, and you'll tell me if you agree that there's an absolute conflict here. Again, maybe I'm making a mountain out of a molehill. I don't know. Well, let me read to you what I have here. First, I'll read the Masifta. That's the Gemara that I usually use. And the Masifta writes, here on Daf Ches Amud Beis, with regard to the Brisa of Reb Chia, it says, Arba Kosel Sha'omru Yeshnan Revius Shal Yayin Be'italki. And he says the following, Yesh B'chol Arba HaKosos Yachad Shir Shal Revius Halug Shal Yayin Ha'italki. And if I read this correctly, saying that the total volume of all four kotzos together is Revius Halug of Yayin Ha'italki, Yayin Chazak, Haba Me'eretz Italia, Nimtza, Shebechol Kos, Yesh Reva Revius Halug Yayin. Every cup has a quarter of a lug of Yayin. Ukshosifo Olav Shlosha Chalokim Mayim, Nimtza Kos Machzik Revius Yayin Mazuk. So after you dilute it, you end up with Revius Yayin Mazuk. Now let me read to you the Art Scroll. The Art Scroll says that properly diluted wine contains 3 parts of water to 1 part of wine. Hence, each of the 4 cups of wine requires at least 1/4 revius of pure wine, so that it will contain a full revius after being mixed with 3/4 of a revius of water. I mean, are they saying the same thing just in different words? He's saying in the Art Scroll that each of the 4 cups requires 1/4 of a revius of pure wine, and a full revius after it's mixed with 3/4 of a revius of water. A full revius. So Yayin Mozik is a full revius. Now, if you're talking about pure undiluted wine, then the Art Scroll has it as 1/4 of a revius. And he says here in the Masifta that Kol Kos Yeshlo Reva Revius Halug Yayin, 1/4 of a quarter. You know what? I think I'm making a mountain out of a molehill. Maybe they're both saying the same thing, just in different words. It's the etymology, the language here that's confusing. The language is a little bit ambiguous. They both agree that we need a revius of yayin mozuk. So then pure wine, undiluted, is a quarter of a revius, which is 1/16 of a lug. So you have a quarter of a quarter, you add 3/4, and you end up with a quarter. So they're both saying the same thing. Okay, I false alarm, if you don't mind. All right. So now, Rabbosai, we go on, and we're up to Ma'u Lotzeis B'Yayin Mizugin. Okay, then. Just 1 second. I just want to make sure I have the right place. So the first word of the line is Mahu. Mahu Lotzeis B'Yayin Mizugin. It's approximately 2/3 of the way down the Amud. Now, if you take a look at the art scroll, he writes, apparently the questioner here was unfamiliar with the brisa cited earlier on this Amud, which indicates clearly that diluted wine is acceptable for the Daled Kosos. And that, I believe, is this brisa of Rabbi Chia. The Tony Rabbi Chia, Arba Kosos Sha'amru, is revius shel yayin b'italki. So we are diluting the yayin haitalki. And in fact, we started with a brisa that hamotzi yayin kidei mezigas hakos, and that's already yayin chai, and we're adding to it mezigas hakos. So that's what he's pointing out over here, that the shoel here, ma'ulotzeis b'yayin mizugim, is unaware of what we had in the brisa until now. And the Gemara answers me to Tani Rabbi Chia, Arba Kosa Sha'amru, Yotzim Bohen Bein Chayim Ubein Mizugin. So the Brisa is outspoken about the fact that you could be Yote, the mitzvah of Daled Kosos, with either undiluted or with diluted wine. Ubilvad she'ehei bohen tam umare yayin. Now, the simple pshat in this Yerushalmi is that the word ubilvad goes back on mizugin. And it's coming to qualify that there's no carte blanche that you could use all diluted wines. But rather the restriction, or shall we say the condition under which you can use and validate diluted wine, is that it has both mara and tam yain. That's the simple pshat. However, in the Taklin Kadatin, he claims that when it says tam umara, tam is a reference to chai, and mara is related to mazug. And basically, both yayin chai and yayin mazug have a deficiency, so to speak, and therefore we have to keep it in check by fulfilling the following requirement, the following regulation. In the case of yayin chai, the problem is tam. It's a very difficult wine to drink. And at some point, we would say that's not the tam of yayin. No one drinks concentrated wine. We dilute it. And concentrated wine doesn't have a taste of wine. It has a different taste, very difficult, harsh taste. So Reb Chia, in his brisa, is adding a restriction that with regard to mayim, with regard to yayin chai, it's not an absolute rule, carte blanche, that all undiluted wine is fit for the mitzvah. We need that it have a tam of yayin, that it's not overly concentrated. It's tolerable, if I could use that word. And then the word mare is qualifying yayin mazuk. Once I dilute the wine, I have to make sure that it's not so diluted that it doesn't even look like wine anymore. Obviously, if you took some wine and you kept pouring and pouring and pouring water in it, at some point, it may have a little bit of a residue of a blue color or red color, but it's not the color of wine. That's the way the Taklin Chadatin learns this brisa. But that's not the simple pshat in the brisa. The simple pshat in the brisa is that the brisa prefers lechatchila yayin chai, this undiluted wine, the concentrated wine that is a quarter of her revius. And if you're going to dilute it and we bring it up to a revius, then we have to make sure that it has both tam and mara, that both conditions are fulfilled. It's not so watered down and diluted that I don't taste it as wine. And number two, it has the color of wine. That's the simple pshat in this brisa. Now, that's what I have here in the Masechet. And he says in the art scroll, he says the underlying point in question is why the rabbis instituted the obligation to drink 4 cups of wine on Pesach. And this is Yerushalmi in the last parak of Pesachim. One explanation is that the 4 cups of wine correspond to the 4 Lashonos of Geula. However, there's another opinion that the 4 cups of wine correspond to 4 times that we find the word kas in the story of the dreams of the Sarah Mashkim and the Sarah Ophim in the 40th chapter of Bereshis. And the Yerushalmi sees in those dreams a prophecy that foretells the ultimate redemption. So this all happens in the dungeon of Potiphar, and the wine in the entire story of the Sarah Mashkin and Sarah Ophim, specifically the Sarah Mashkin, is undiluted wine. How do we know that? Because the pasuk says, I took the grapes and I squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, implying that he didn't dilute it. It came straight from the grapes. There's another opinion in the Yerushalmi that the 4 cups symbolize the cups of Puranios meaning of punishment, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu during the time of Mashiach will mete out against the nations that subjugated the Jewish people through the centuries. And according to that explanation, then you could use standard wine. There's no reason to demand a requirement of unconcentrated, pure, undiluted wine. It could be diluted wine, which is standard wine that we buy in the wine store. Now, if you're going to say it's Keneged Dal Lashon Shel Geula, which is the one that we're most familiar with, Lakachti, V'yatzati V'esi G'alti, then I don't know one way or the other. I would assume it's, again, the standard wine. It's only in the case of the dream of the Saramashkin where we find the pasuk seems to indicate that it's got to be undiluted wine. So this is a presentation that he mentions the name of Talmud Arashbash. Now, the Gemara's final conclusion is that Yayin Mazug is acceptable, providing that it fills those requirements, those restrictions of Tam Umara Yayin. My impression is that the same halacha would apply with regard to Kiddush. That Yayin for Kiddush would have to have these two conditions met. It would have to be Yayin, the Yesh both Tam Yayin and Mara Yayin. And I emphasize this because as we go through this sugya, we'll become sensitive to the distinction between Dalid Kosos and Kiddush. Amar Rab Yirmiyah. Now we talk about the color of wine. And once again, I'm wondering whether the Gemara is going to focus our attention on Dalid Kosos specifically, or on Kiddush as well. Rabbi Yirmiyah is quoted as saying, "Mitzvah lotzeis b'yayin adon." We should use red wine. Now, personally, I drink white wine. So what I do is, on the night of the Seder, I add some red wine to my white wine. I make a mixture. So it changes the color of the wine. Why red? Shenemar, based on a pasuk in Mishlei, Altera Yayin Kiyas Adam, Kitain Bekos Eino Yisalech B'mei Sharim. And the pasuk in Mishlei is enjoining us to not focus on wine that's red. He says, do not set your sight upon wine that is red. He identifies wine as being red. For to one who fixes his eyes on the goblet, and then it says that he will become intoxicated. So a person is warned about overindulging in wine, which is still a contemporary issue today, just as it was at the time of Shlomo Melech when he authored Mishlei. And wine has intoxicating qualities. You have to be very careful with it, because if not, then the pasuk tells us Yishalech Be'Sharm, you won't be able to distinguish between the right path and the wrong path. But yet, the wine is described as red wine. And that gives you the impression that the superior wine, which would tempt a person if he overindulged, would be red wine. And if that's the superior quality wine, then we understand Rabbi Yirmiyah's preference recommending that we use red wine. And here we have a machlokes between the Rashba and the Ramban. The Rashba says that although the pasuk in Mishlei indicates that there's a shvach, there's a, it's more laudatory to a higher quality wine is red wine, but that's only lechatchila. B'di'eved, you would be yotze even with white wine. That's the shita of the Rashba. So I'm going to read to you the Ramban as quoted here in the Yalkut Habiurim in the back of the Mesifta. He says that the Ramban writes that Be'inon Dafka Yayin Adon Ubiyayin Lavan Afilu B'di'eved Lo Yatsa, says the Ramban. Now the Gon agrees in Shulchan Aruch that you could be Yotzei B'di'eved with white wine. It's only a question of L'chatchila. But the Ramban was of the opinion that Lo Yatsa, unless it's red wine. The Achi Eba and Mara Yayin, who ma'akev afilu b'di'eved, v'divrei Rabbi Yirmiyah mitzvah, even though the God is right that classically when you see the word mitzvah, and that's what Rabbi Yirmiyah said, mitzvah b'yayin adom, it means l'chatchila, that's the best way ideally of doing it. Says Ramban, no, mitzvah means this is the way that you can fulfill the mitzvah, and if not, you have not fulfilled your obligation even b'di'eved. Now, I would like to throw in another element into the equation that maybe here we should distinguish between red wine as far as Daled Kosos is concerned and red wine as far as Kiddush is concerned. And it could be, I'm just throwing out an idea, that the Ramban would agree with the other view, let's call it the Gaon's view, with regard to Kiddush. And this requirement of a superior quality wine, namely with red wine, is reflective of Daled Kosos. And that for two reasons. One is because with regard to Daled Kosos, we want that element of intoxication so that you could be Makayim the mitzvah of Simchas Yontif. And many people have asked me about grape juice. I don't know. I have hesitations to recommend grape juice on Yontif. Because when you're talking about Yayin Yisamach Lev Enosh, Yisamachta B'chagecha, I don't know if you could say about grape juice that it's more Misamech than any other. I like apple juice. So you're going to tell me, well, no, there's no simcha unless you drink grape juice. But if it's wine with an intoxicating element, and that's the subject of this pasuk in Mishlei, warning us not to overindulge in wine, then you could be Makayim that element of Simchas Yontif. And Daled Kosos, which is Derech Cherus, is meant to fulfill the mitzvah of Simcha. But in Kiddush, it could be even the Ramban would agree that whatever you have, it's white wine, if it's maybe grape juice even, could be the Ramban would say that's fine. I don't know. Funny, we have a brisa with regard to Yayin Mevushal. This is a major issue in both Kiddush and Daled Kosos. And that is pasteurized wine. The brisa says about Mevushal, Yayin Mevushal, Kimitubal. It has the same status as Canditon. Now, if you remember yesterday, which was a few lines earlier, we had a brisa Bar Kapara, and Canditon had the status of Yayin, and it's valid. So Ma'ul Lotzeis B'Yayin Mevushal. Now you're asking, what's the din of Yayin Mevushal? Well, you just established in this brisa that Yayin Mevushal has the same din as Mitubal. And Mitubal, where they add honey and spices, what's the problem? We already established that Canditon is valid. The answer is we're making a big mistake. This brisa is not addressing not Daled Kosos and not Kiddush. It's addressing the mitzvah of Yayin al Gabi Mizbech of Nisuch HaYayin. and the requirements and the standards of yayin l'nisuch are that much higher and more demanding than with regard to Dalit Kosos or Kiddush. Here, when the Brisa says that Yayin Mevushal is Kimitubal, what it means is that both are excluded from Nisuch HaYayin. In fact, the Chiddush of Bar Kapara with regard to Kaniton, by equating it with Yayin and Yotzim Yayin Kaniton, is that even though Yayin Kaniton, which has an ingredient of honey and spices, is invalid, it's excluded from Nisuch HaYayin, nevertheless, we can use it for the mitzvah of Dalid Kosos. So therefore, when our Gemara says Ma'u Lotzeis B'Yayin Mevushal, the Gemara, in essence, is going back to the original issue about Kanditon and asking, is Kanditon valid? Does it qualify for Dalid Kosos? We know it's invalid for Yayin L'Nitzach Al Gabi Mizbeach. Is that a unique halach in Mizbeach? But as far as Dalid Kosos is concerned, we can be Yotzi with Kanditon. And ipso facto, the same issue is going to apply to Mevushal, because Mevushal and Kanditon are in the same league, in the same bag, as far as Yayin L'Nisachim are concerned. Omar Rab Yonah, Yotzim b'Yayin Mevushal. Just like we came to the conclusion, based on the Brisa Bar Kapara, that Kanditon qualifies for Dalid Kosos, despite the Psul Limizbeach, so too Yayin Mevushal, says Rab Yonah, qualifies for Dalid Kosos, this despite the fact that it's disqualified from Nisuch HaYayin. So we see clearly that there are two different dinim. One din as far as Nisuch, and another din as far as Dalid Kosos is concerned. In Nisuch HaYayin, the Yayin, once it's added, once you add other extraneous elements, you add the honey or the tavlin, the different kinds of spices. It's called Mosif Gorea that passes the yayin. Does that mean that yayin kanditon is of an inferior quality to regular yayin l'nisuk? No. As far as quality is concerned, on the contrary, yayin kanditon is a rich man's wine. It's even more sophisticated, more tasty. And certainly, therefore, we can use it and qualify for Dalid Kosos. Mizbeach is a different story. The Torah says don't add into the mixture. Now the Gemara is saying in the name of Rabbi Yonah that the same logic applies to Yayin Mevushal. That Yayin Mevushal is a separate psul lemizbeach. Lemizbeach for Nisuch HaYayin, we need yayin in its natural state, not cooked wine. But with regard to Dalid Kosos, the main issue is in the result of the cooking. How tasty is the wine, and is it standard wine? And many people will swear by Yayin Mevushal. They love Yayin Mevushal. But now we get to the question of Kiddush. What's the status of both Kanditon and Yayin Mevushal with regard to Kiddush? The Rambam has an absolute equation between Nisuch HaYayin and Kiddush. This is the Rambam in the 29th chapter of Hilchos Shabbos. Ein mekadshin ela al yayin haroy l'naseach al gabe mizbeach. Lefichach, im nis'ari bo dvash o sior, afilu ketipas achardo b'chavis gedol ein mekadshin ola. The Rambam says we do not make kiddush on wine that has dvash in it. And here the Rambam is excluding kanditon for the mitzvah of kiddush. The Rambam says it's all based on an equation between yayin lekiddush and yayin lenisuch al gabi mizbeach. Then the Rambam writes, Yesh Mishamatir L'Kadish Olav, the Omer. There's another opinion that you can make Kiddush on Kaditon. That's not the Rambam's opinion, but Shalom Nemar Yayin Aroy L'Nezech El Agav Mizech El Lahotzi Yayin Sherecho Ra O Megula O Mevushal She'ein Makadshim Al Echad Mim. The Rambam clearly indicates that Yayin Mevushal, according to every opinion, is excluded from Kiddush. Could you imagine, Rabbi Osa? We can waver back and forth with regard to Kanditon, and the Rambam has his view, L'chumra, as far as Kiddush, and another view, L'kula, is Matir, but the Rambam, in the Rambam's frame of reference, even Yayin Mevushal, even if you hold that Kanditon is kosher, it's possible L'kiddush. And the Rambam clearly understood that by cooking the wine, you reduce or downgrade its quality. The Raiva disagrees, based on Asugya, and he says, Yain Kanditon kosher. The Gemara came to the conclusion, in the name of Rabbi Yonah, that Yain Kanditon, well, first, actually, I'm skipping a step. The Gemara came to the conclusion, based on Pani de Rapapa, Arkapara, that Yain Kanditon is kosher. And the Raiva understood it means it's kosher l'kiddush, not just the Dalit Kosas. And then we have Rabbi Yonah, who the Gemara is quoted as saying that Yayin Mevuchal is kosher. And once again, the Raiva is going to learn that we're talking about kiddush. And Rabbi Yonah, Allah is like Rabbi Yonah, that Yayin Mevuchal is kosher l'kiddush. So basically, we could summarize three shitos. Everybody agrees that both Kanditon and Mevuchal is disqualified for the Mizbeach. What's the din of Yayin Kanditon, Yayin Mevushal with regard to other mitzvahs, namely Kiddush and Daled Kosas? Shita number one is the Rambam. The Rambam holds that all wines that apostle leMizbeach leNisuch ipso facto are disqualified for both Kiddush for the mitzvah of Kiddush. Then we have the Ravid Shita, that even Yayin Mevushal, like Yayin Shel Kanditon, is kosher l'kiddush. And then we have a middle Shita, which the Rambam quotes in his presentation, that as far as Kiddush is concerned, we have to differentiate between the two categories. And Yayin Shel Kanditon is acceptable, but Yayin Mevushal is unacceptable. Now, I don't know if you know of any people. I know of a Talmud of mine who is very makpid. He has his own wines, and he knows it's not mevushal, and that's what he uses for kiddush, like the Shitas around. So that's what we have over here. Now, where is the source for this halacha that Yayin Mevushal is disqualified for Mizbeach, for Nisuch HaYayin? This is a Gemara in Baba Basra on Daf Tzadi Zayin. Ein Omrim Kiddush El Al Yayin HaRoy L'Nisuch Al Gabi Mizbeach, the Yayin Mevushal Eino Roy L'Nisuch. Is therefore Ein Yotzin Yedei Kiddush Yayin Mevushal. Then the Gemara has a tzad to extend that to include Dalid Kosos. Oh, shenismaid mi kiddush rak b'dvarim she'enam ru'iyim l'nisuch machma shenishtanu l'greus. There's a tzad in the Gemara to say that the equation between Yayin for Kiddush and Yayin L'Nisuch is only when the psul in Yayin L'Nisuch is L'Greus. V'atam shu posel nischasim nishtana briyoso and lemizbeach kosher gak davar shelo nishtana. What do we bring on the mizbeach? We bring an animal, let's say, but it's not a balmum. It has no blemish. What we're deriving in it conceptually is that yayin that has a blemish to it is excluded from the mizbeach in the midst of Nisa. So that's the suffix in the Gemara. The Gemara is vacillating about that which is possible lim mizbeach because it's mishtana libriuso, even if it's not ligreusa. Would it be ipso facto excluded from kiddush and maybe even dalit kos? But now he quotes from Meir Simcha the Or Sameach. Who pirish a suffix a Gemara biel im yotzin b'yayin shel shvius who mishum she'eno kosher l'nisachim. The Gemara vacillated about yayin shel shvius. Upshuto shekosher l'dalit kosas. The Or Sameach assumes that there's not even a halamina that you would exclude shvius wine from dalit kosas because there's no nishtana l'greusa. It's a separate halacha that you can't use shvius yayin for nisach hayayin. Ulafize gam yayin mevushal kosher v'ain stopping bo. Says Rabbi Simcha, the Gemara never vacillated about the status of yayin mevushal. It's certainly kosher. So just like yayin shel shvius, which is possible in mizbeach for nisach, is certainly, without a shadow of a doubt, kosher l'dalit kosos. So too, yayin mevushal, which is possible in nisach hayayin, is clearly and undeniably kosher for the mitzvah of dalit kosos, like yayin shel shvius. So what is the Gemara's suffix about yayin mevushal? Who ha'im yayin mevushal kosher l'nyin kiddush? Hoil v'yeno royal in his sachim. He says that just like in the sachim, you need kibriyaso, meaning wine in its natural form as opposed to mevushal. So too in Kiddush, we require yayin kibriyaso to the exclusion of mevushal, according to one side in the Gemara. So says Rabbi Simcha, which would mean that the only yayin that's kosher l'kiddush would be yayin chai, undiluted wine. That's kibriyaso. It's in its natural state. Upashtu, but the Gemara's final conclusion is that yotzim b'yayin mevushal, that you can fulfill your mitzvah of kiddush with yayin mevushal, and that's what we saw in the Rav. The Goris b'Yushalmi ki girsas karbona eda tni mevushal kidei tabel so 1 second here. Mevushal, not sure what he means here, but he says Ma'ulakses v'yayin mevushal Rabbi Yonah Amar Yotzu v'yayin mevushal pirish Shemash Amar mevushal kidei tevel koyal dino tzos Shabbos kidei mezigas kos. So the word tough Beis Lamed here, kind of a spicing, means it's like meziga. It makes it even more enjoyable to drink. Valzeh omer sheyayin mevushal Hu kemo tavlin, v'shiuro kemotzi tavlin, sheshiuro kedei l'tavel beitza kala. V'chein, yain mevushal, shiuro l'tavel bo beitza kala. V'tzarch ligos mevushal kedei l'tavel. Ainu l'tavel kigrogeres mi beitza kala. Okay. Now, the next piece of Gemara here is Agadita. So we'll read it through very quickly because the Gemara picks up the halacha right away. Chamite chadamachonisa apoi nehiri. So we're talking about an encounter between one of the sorrows of the authorities, a Goyata, who encounters Rabbi Yonah and finds Rabbi Yonah's radiance is shining. It's like glowing. He's got a glowing radiance. His face is glowing. Amarlo. So she said about Rabbi Yonah, Saba Saba, old man. That itself sounds pejorative. But she offers three alternative possibilities as to why his face is radiant. One, Chada Mechad Mehani Tlas Milaniska. Odishsu Yechamrat. Either you've drunk a lot of wine, and people's face, the countenance reflects the fact that they're intoxicated. Oh, Demalve Ribisato. Great. You have money that you lent out, so you have all sorts of debtors, and they have to pay you ribbis. And you're a rich man, you don't even have to lift a finger. So of course you're in a happy mood. Oh, the megadli chazireat, or maybe you raise pigs. And he adds here in the Masifta, sheyoldos harbe bekeres echad, that many little piglets are born simultaneously. So again, it's a great living. Very easy to make a good buck. So you're in a good mood. Omar Allah, so I don't know, it says Omar Allah. I don't know. I'm a little bit scared to read it as Omar Allah, that Rabbi Yonah is about to say something to her. I would say that Omar Allah here means about her or concerning her. Tibach rucha da'isasa. He curses her that she should die. Techada me'ilin tlas milsa lespe. None of these three accusations are borne out. In other words, we don't overindulge in wine, and we don't take usury, and we don't breed pigs. Hello. And now if you're wondering why my countenance radiates, it's ulpene shchichili. My Talmud is in my hand, so to speak. And I have opportunities to develop novel insights into the Torah. And I'll prove to you that if a person is dedicated to the study of Torah and he comes up with insights in Torah, his face radiates. Tichsiv. Maybe I shouldn't use the word radiates. How do you say radiant in a verb? It is radiant. You say radiates? I don't know. Ochmas Adam Toyer Panav. A man's wisdom brightens his face. Pasuk in Koheles. So again, a Talmud Chacham has opportunities to develop chidushim, insights into Torah. And not only that, he quotes here in the Masifta, the Rash Sir Leo, that Rabbi Yonah was saying, I don't forget my Torah. It's constantly accessible to me. Many people get down a little bit. They study Torah and then they forget the Torah that they studied. Rabbi Avo Asi Litveri, the Gemara gives another story about someone who radiates, his countenance radiates and shines because of his chidushim in Torah. Chamune Talmido, his Talmidim, the Rabbi Yochanan, the Talmidim of Rabbi Yochanan saw Rabbi Avo when he came to town, to the city of Tveria, and Apoi Nahorid, and Rabbi Avo's face radiated certain shine. Amrun, Talmidim of Rabbi Yochanan, they came to Rabbi Yochanan, they said, you know why we saw this like glowing countenance of Rabbi Avo? Apparently, Ashkech Rabbi Avo Sima. He must have come across a matmon in modern Hebrew, a treasure. Who knows how many millions of dollars he had a beautiful investment in the market. So he's just jumping for joy. Oh, no. Rabbi Yochanan is going to set them straight. The simcha of Rabbi Avo is not because he found gold or silver, he found some treasures, but rather Torah, which is Yekara Hi Mipninin. It's even more cherished and valuable than the most expensive jewels. And now Rabbi Yochanan is going to try to prove that Rabbi Avo must have come up with some insight, something new in Torah, and that's why his face radiated. Also, Legabe, Rabbi Avo shows up in front of Rabbi Yochanan. Omar Le, so Rabbi Yochanan asks Rabbi Avo, "My oraisa chadita shamata? What new novel chidushim in Torah have you heard? Because you're shining." Omar Le Tosefta Atika. He found an ancient Tosefta. And in the footnote, he writes, Rabbi Avo discovered an old, rare section of the Tosefta that had never been heard before. He came across, I guess, a manuscript. Maybe he bought it at a public auction. I don't know. Upon learning its novel teachings, he experienced the ecstasy of one who comes across sudden riches. Torah is like coming across riches. Korale, so Rabbi Yochanan quotes the pasuk in Koheles, Chachmas Adam Toyer. Okay, now the Gemara goes back to the halachic part of the sugi. Amalei, Omar Rabbi Chanin, Loga Doraisa. The measurement of a log, and we've been talking about a revius of a log, is Doraisa. What is it? How do I know what exactly is a log? How do I measure it? So today you would tell me in ounces, so forth. Back at the time of the Gemara, it was Tmunasa Atika. It was a midah that was popular and common at the time of the Talmud, and it was called Tmunasa Atika, Dimuryasa de Tzipora. Now, Tumnasa is a measurement that they used, which was equivalent to a log dough rice. And now, again, you're just begging the question. So, what's the volume of a tumnasa? The answer is muryasa de tzipori. That the fishermen, or shall I say the fishmongers who sell fish, they weigh something called tzir dagim. or the fats of the fishes, and they used a certain utensil that when it was a certain receptacle, when it was filled to the top, they knew it had muryasa d'tzipor, which is equal to tmunasa atika. Amar Rab Yonah, he says, even though your midah is out of fashion, we use other measurements today. But nevertheless, chachamnole. Chachamnole means I came across that old midah of muryasa d'tzipor. And I remember the base Rabbi Yanai Havi Mechilin Dvash. In other words, in the household of Rav Yanai, and I remember this receptacle, they used to measure honey with it. So he's identifying the utensil, so we'll know exactly what is the volume of a lug. Tani, we learned in the Brisa, Chatzi Shminis Tivronis. A half Shminis in Tiveria. Here we turn to Daf Tes, Hayishana, that was commonplace in the old city of Tiveria. So we have something in Tiveria called Shminis Tivronis. And this old Shminis Tivronis that was used in ancient times is equal to the midah of a revius halug. Now, until now, we've been talking about a full lug. And we spoke about tmunasa and muryasa. Now, apparently, we're talking about a revius halug. Amar Rabbi Yochanan hadein didanu. Even in our time in the city of Tveria, we still have this midah, this measuring cup, if you will. Velama kari le'atika. So why is it called Shminis Tivernas Hayishana? Atika meaning from a previous generation. Min begin to have it biyom. He says, Be'im amida azu adayin haiseno heges bismanam. Why, Rabbi Yochanan, do we call it Atika? We call it Yeshana if it's still commonly used. So Gemara offers two answers. Isti Amri, those who say, Tahav is the era of the Rabsa, that this midah changed over the course of time. And before Rabbi Yochanan, at some point, they added to it. Hosifu Aleha. So Rabbi Yochanan wants to tell you that subsequently, they again reduced it, and now it's equal to what it was originally. So we call it Yeshana, Mishum Shayezman B'emtza Shegadla Midah. So we use the word Yeshana to describe this lafuki, that middle of the road midah, which was before Rabbi Yochanan's time, that was larger than a revius lug. Istiami, others say the azeira velo azeira kemadahabs, that already in Rabbi Yochanan's time they went back and they started diminishing. They made it hiktinu, they made it smaller, this midah. But lo hiktinu osa l'kfi shahaisa mikodem. In other words, as we said before, over the course of time, the measure changed and it became larger. But nevertheless, Rabbi Yochanan says we have to call it Yeshana because it's still not exactly what it was originally. Adayin hi gedola Yosef. So the meter that was extant, that was popular and commonplace at the time of Rabbi Yochanan, we can't use that as a midah to be mishayir to evaluate how much is a revius. We have to go back to the earlier midah. So let's make a note of where we got up to here. Kama hu shir shelkos. And we're at the top of Daf Tes Amud Aleph.